we have been discussing about Heraclitus. We continue further to discuss about why Heraclitus was called as the Dark, or why was he critical of conventional knowledge. In this lecture, we will be discussing about Heraclitus's critique of conventional knowledge. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Heraclitus had sharply criticized conventional knowledge, arguing that most people, even the educated, poets and philosophers, fail to grasp the deeper truth of reality. And this comes vis-a-vis his understanding of what logos is all about. And he thinks rightly so that someone who cannot understand the very significance of logos, doesn't matter whether he is a philosopher or a poet or an educated man, it becomes self-defeating. His critique is not just intellectual but existential. It concerns how people live, think and relate to the cosmos. For Heraclitus, wisdom is not about accumulating information but about understanding the logos, the hidden rational structure of the universe. Failure to understand logos. Heraclitus asserts that most people live as though they each have their own private logic, ignoring the universal order. This for Heraclitus is problematic because conventional knowledge is fragmented and self-centered, while true understanding recognizes the shared rational structure behind appearance. Critique of sensory knowledge and surface appearance. Heraclitus warns that mere sense perception or external observation does not lead to deep truth. People trust the senses but do not see the process of change, the hidden harmony, or the unity of opposites. Eyes and ears are bad witness to people if they have souls that do not understand their language. Knowing requires interpretation, reflection, and insight, not just data or sensory facts. Attack on poets, historians, and polymaths. Heraclitus singles out figures of conventional wisdom like Homer, Hesiod, Pythagoras as lacking true understanding. Quote, "Much learning does not teach understanding," unquote, fragment 40. He accuses Pythagoras, who was famous for collecting knowledge of intellectual theft and confusion. Pythagoras practiced inquiry beyond all other man, and selecting from these writings made himself wise, a polymath, a bad art, fragment 129. This shows Heraclitus' distinction between surface-level knowledge, polymath, and insightful wisdom, Sophia. People are asleep to reality. Heraclitus believed that most people are asleep even while awake. They live passively, unaware of the truth. They are at odds with the logos, with which they are in continuous contact, but they are unable to recognize it. This implies a spiritual sleep or ignorance, a failure to engage with the dynamic, ever-changing reality. True knowledge is self-knowledge, which is Heraclitus proposes a radical inward turn. Wisdom begins with knowing oneself. I searched into myself. This emphasizes contrasts with the external empirical focus of conventional knowledge and aligns with the Socratic ideal later seen in Know Thyself. In the PPT displayed here, we see about Heraclitus's view about the conventional knowledge. Heraclitus's view about he seeks to understanding of logos, which is that he is critical about one who just gathers facts, myths, or technical knowledge. Heraclitus's view about embraces change and contradiction, and the conventional knowledge that he criticizes is it seeks stability and clear-cut answers. Heraclitus's view advocates self-inquiry, and he criticizes one that relies on external authority like poets, historians. Heraclitus' view again about he sees wisdom as insight, and he criticizes the conventional knowledge who confuses learning with wisdom. Further, Heraclitus' view warns against illusion of senses, and the conventional knowledge is criticized where trusts one that only trusts sensory experience without reflection. So we see that Heraclitus' critique is epistemological, ethical, and spiritual. He does not just say people know little. He argues that they are cut off from reality because they trust appearances over processes, gather knowledge without wisdom, and live without attending to the deep structure, logos of existence. For Heraclitus, true wisdom requires transformation, not just information. Again, if we have a look at the PPT here, we see that if we compare Heraclitus, Buddha, and the Yajnavalkya on conventional knowledge, the theme about the critique of sense-based knowledge, in Heraclitus we see the quote, eyes and ears are bad witnesses, the sense perception is unreliable unless guided by deep understanding. Similarly, something same can be seen in Buddhism, where the senses are deceiver and attach us to impermanent phenomena. Mindfulness is required to see reality clearly. And similarly, in the Upanishadic sage of the Yajnavalkya, we see that it rejects ritualism and mere sensory observation of sacrifice. It seeks knowledge of the eternal self, Atman, beyond perception. Similarly, when we compare and contrast Heraclitus, the Buddha, and the Upanishadic sage Yajnavalkya, we see that the theme attack on intellectual accumulation, where Heraclitus talks about how much learning does not teach understanding. He attacks scholars like Pythagoras for knowing many things but lacking true wisdom. In Buddhism, again, we see that it condemns metaphysical speculation and scholastic disputation, emphasizes direct insight over textual mastery. Further, in Brihadnyaka Upanishad, we see that he mocks learned priests and posits neti neti, which is not this, not that, as the way to understand the self. Further, on the theme of true knowledge is inner awakening, Heraclitus's I search into myself. The true wisdom comes from self-exploration and understanding the logos. Buddhism is also about the Pachatam Veditava Vinniti, which is to be known individually by the wise. Awakening comes from direct experiential insight, which is Vipassana. And again, in the Upanishadic sage, we see that it sees self or Atman as pure consciousness. True knowledge is self-realization, not scriptural accumulation. Further, on the theme of the critique of mass mentality, the Heraclitus' view about how most lives, as if they had private understanding, people live unaware of the logos. Buddhism's worldly person is trapped in illusion, moha. True seekers must break from common views, and Upanishadic sage criticizes Vedic rituals for clinging to karma and names rather than seeking inner essence. Further, the theme on the goal of knowledge, Heraclitus, we see it, he tries to understand the logos, the rational principle behind all change and unity of opposites. In Buddhism, we see that to see through illusion, attain nibbana by breaking the cycle of craving and suffering, and again in the Upanishadic sage, to realize the self Atman as identical with the Brahman, who's timeless, indivisible, beyond change. So we find that for Heraclitus, what is important is the transformational knowledge and not just conventional knowledge. For all three, Heraclitus is from Greece, Buddha or Buddhism from India, and the Upanishadic sage. For all the three, knowledge is not passive or external. It is a path of awakening that transforms one's being. For Heraclitus, knowing the logos is living according to it. For Buddha, knowing the dharma is walking the middle way. For Yajnavalkya, knowing the self leads to liberation or moksha. Number 2, critique of ritualism and textual authority. Heraclitus rejected Homer and Hesiod as superficial. The Buddha questioned the authority of the Vedas and the Brahminical rituals. Yajnavalkya moved beyond Karma Kanda, which is the ritualistic Vedas, towards Jnana Kanda, or the knowledge of self. Hidden or subtle reality. Heraclitus speaks of the hidden harmony. The Buddha teaches that reality is marked by impermanence and non-self. It is hard to grasp without mindfulness. Yajnavalkya claims that self is not perceptible but is subtle, immortal, and infinite. Opposition to conventional wisdom. All three oppose the dominant worldview of their time. Heraclitus critiqued preachers, poets, and the crowd. The Buddha challenged Brahmin orthodoxy and metaphysical speculation. Yajnavalkya confronted Vedic priests and their literalism. So we see that while arising in different cultures, Heraclitus, Buddha, Yajnavalkya shares a profound conviction, which is true wisdom transcends tradition, ritual, sensory evidence, and rote learning. Knowledge is not a matter of knowing more, but of seeing more deeply. It requires an inward turn, a break from convention, and an embrace of the paradoxical, dynamic, and subtle truths of the heart of existence. Philosophically, Heraclitus' assertion that conventional wisdom is superficial, truth requires insight, is a deep epistemological critique, challenging not only the way knowledge is acquired, but also the very nature of truth and understanding. So then, what is it that we come up as significant takeaways? Number 1, conventional wisdom is superficial. Conventional wisdom, or doxa in Greek, is based on public opinion, socially accepted norms, surface level sensory experience, reputation of inherited myths or rituals. Heraclitus argues that such wisdom is passive. It's absorbed without questioning. It is conformist. It is aligned with the majority and fragmentary. It sees parts, not the whole. In fragment 40, Heraclitus says, quote, "Much learning does not teach understanding," unquote. Here he criticizes polymath, the accumulation of information, and that it is not equivalent to true insight, Sophia. At best, it is just doxa. The second takeaway is the truth requires insight, or noesis. Heraclitus proposes that truth lies beneath appearances. To grasp it requires a deep, intuitive understanding that sees the unity in diversity, recognizes the law of change, flux, understands the logos, the rational principle that aligns all things. The logos is common, but most live as though they had a private understanding, fragment 2. People ignore the universal order because they fail to look inward and reflect. Number 3, or the third takeaway, is that the senses deceive. Insights interprets. Heraclitus is not anti-sensory, but he warns that the senses give data, but without interpretation they mislead. One must grasp the underlying process behind sensory inputs. Fragment 107, Heraclitus quotes, "Eyes and ears are bad witnesses to people if they have souls that do not understand their language." Thus, perception must be guided by insight, not just accepted at face value. The fourth takeaway is true wisdom is lived, not taught. Heraclitus sees truth as something to be lived through awareness of the logos, not taught through doctrine. Fragment 101 quotes, I searched into myself. Here, self-inquiry replaces second-hand knowledge. Insight is existential, not merely intellectual. His emphasis is similar to Socratic and Upanishadic views, where for Socrates it has always been know thyself, and Yajnavalkya again, Atman is to be realized, not explained. The fifth takeaway is that conventional knowledge fails to grasp the oppositional unity. Conventional thinking wants fixed categories, good, bad, hot, cold, day, night. But Heraclitus teaches that truth lies in the unity of opposites. Fragment 60 quotes, the path up and down are one and the same. Superficial thought cannot comprehend this paradox. Insight perceives the hidden harmony. The sixth takeaway is about the insight into flux and logos. Heraclitus' core insight is everything flows, panthare. You cannot step into the same river twice, fragment 12. Conventional wisdom wants stability and a sense, but reality is a process, tension and becoming. Only a philosophical insight that is A. dynamic, 2. reflective, 3. willing to hold contradiction can truly understand this. Now, if we look at the PPT displayed here, we see that between conventional wisdom and Heraclitean insight, the basis of conventional wisdom is that social norms, senses, inherited views forms the conventional wisdom, whereas for the Heraclitean insight, introspection, critical thinking, understanding logos. The method of conventional wisdom is memorization, passive acceptance. For Heraclitean insight, it is active reflection, dialectical reasoning. For the aspect of nature of truth, conventional wisdom is static, fixed categories. Heraclitean insight, it is dynamic, paradoxical and hidden. The goal of conventional wisdom is a social knowledge or prestige. Heraclitean insight is harmony with cosmic order or logos. Epistemic quality, it is fragmented, shallow. Heraclitean insight is, it is unified, deep, existential. So, we see that Heraclitus' philosophy is not anti-knowledge, but the radical revaluation of what knowledge should be, which is, it is not memorized but realized, it is not second-hand but inwardly grasped, it is not superficial but transformative. Thus, his position anticipates many later philosophers, from Plato's critique of doxa to Nietzsche's depth, psychology, and even Buddhists' insights into impermanence. We also thus see the connection to mystical traditions vis-a-vis Heraclitus. For Heraclitus' notion that truth requires insight rather than surface-level knowledge aligns closely with mystical traditions across cultures. These traditions seek not rational proof but direct experiential knowledge, what we might call gnosis, anubhava or inner seeing. There is also this Greek mysticism where Heraclitus' reverence for the logos has strong mystical undertones. It is rational but also cosmic and divine, beyond full verbal articulation. It must be lived through, not just known about. His aphorisms are like a quants, which is paradoxes meant to awaken insight, not explain analytically. We also see the Greek mysticisms connect with Buddhist mysticism, where the Buddha emphasizes insight or vipassana to see impermanence and anatta or anatmavada or the no-self. Conventional knowledge, metaphysics and debate are seen as distractions unless they lead to direct realization. Like Heraclitus, the Buddha saw the world in constant flux, anicca, and required deep insight to navigate this truth. Even in Christianity and Sufi mysticism, the logos in Christian mysticism, especially in John's Gospel, is a divine principle made flesh, a cosmic intelligence. And in Sufi mystics, especially like Rumi, also criticized superficial knowledge, ilm, and calls for direct experiential truth, marifa. Now, relevance to modern education and epistemology. In contemporary thought, Heraclitus's critique is startlingly relevant to how we think about learning, knowledge, and wisdom today. Number one, it is against information overload. Modern education often prioritizes data accumulation, grades, and rote learning. Heraclitus's quote, "Much learning does not teach understanding," directly critiques this. We may know more, but understand less. Deep insight requires integration, critical thinking, and self-awareness. Number two, echoes in educational philosophy. Now, if we talk about the pedagogy of the oppressed, critiques of the banking model of education where students are passive containers. Even with Jiddu Krishnamurti, who argues that learning must be transformative, not just accumulative. He urges for freedom from conditioning, and with Tagore and Aurobindo, Indian educators who believed in inner awakening over examination-centric learning. So we see that in epistemology and cognitive science, distinctions between knowing that, propositional, knowing how, practical, knowing by acquaintance, direct experience. Heraclitus anticipates this. So real wisdom is experiential insight, not just descriptive accuracy. In wisdom traditions and psychology vis-a-vis Carl Jung, we see that they emphasized the role of paradox and inner transformation, which is very Heraclitean in nature. Even in the Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, we see it divides knowledge into classical rational vis-a-vis romantic experiential. Both must be united, like logos and fire in Heraclitus. Now, if we quickly have a look at this PPT here, we see that the domain of mysticism, the superficial knowledge or the doxa, is ritual, scripture, dogma. The transformative insight is, or the logos, direct experience of the divine or the truth. Education, the doxa is memorization, passive learning. Logos is self-reflective, critical, creative thinking. Epistemology, the doxa is fact, proposition, measurement. Logos is wisdom, meaning, pattern, recognition. And last but not the least, about the domain of self-knowledge, doxa is external labels or roles. Logos is introspective realization of the self. So the final words about Heraclitus's view that truth requires insight urges us to look beneath appearances, value paradox and process, and transform knowledge into self-understanding. In this, he stands at the crossroads of mystical insight, radical education, and existential inquiry. His fire still burns in the heart of all who seek to know, not merely to know about. Thank you so much.